So we have a few more features of perfect competition to run through before closing the book on this market structure. One of them is a way of understanding the supply curve we've looked at so much but taken for granted. So what we're going to do to derive the market supply curve, it only works if we assume that all of the firms are exactly the same with the exact same marginal cost. It's one of those assumptions about perfect competition that makes it a pretty unrealistic market, but it's also an assumption that in the long run, in most market structures, you're going to have a pretty similar way of doing things. If not, then firms who aren't able to minimize costs are going to go away, and firms that are able to minimize costs are going to get all the market coming to them. So for firms to be able to continue to compete, their marginal costs are going to have to be very similar. And again, we're going to see the different cost structures in action and how firms are going to enter and exit the industry. But if we assume that the vast majority of firms have the same marginal costs, well, then what we have going on this graph are the different quantities supplied, optimal quantities supplied at different price levels. Price equals marginal revenue equals marginal cost is the optimal production point. So you notice as price goes up, we don't even need a marginal revenue curve here. All we need to know is, does that price correspond, where that price corresponds with the marginal cost curve, that's the quantity that's going to be supplied. So as the price goes up, the quantity supplied goes up along this curve. That sound familiar? It should. That is the law of supply. This marginal cost curve is the short-run supply curve. It's the short-run supply curve because prices are going to change in the long run, and the supply side can change in the long run. And it's also, notice how we don't have anything down here. Why? Well, because this is the shutdown point. This graph started out right here. Remember the low point on the average variable cost curve, or the point at which price would intersect the average variable cost curve. That's going to be the point at which you go any lower than that, you shut down. You stop operating. Oh, and one thing I didn't mention in the last video, if you shut down, that doesn't mean you shut down forever. In the short run, you keep operating here, but in the long run, you get out if price doesn't recover. If you're down here, you shut down in the short run, but if the price recovers, you can open right back up in the long run. Some examples of this, where the price will fall down here and firms will shut down in the short run, but in the long run, prices will recover and they'll open back up. Typical example you'll see in textbooks would be a ski resort. In the warmer months, in the summertime, people aren't going to pay a whole lot of money to just kind of tumble down a grass hill. You could just go outside and do that. I mean, when I brought this up in one class, somebody talked about some sort of extreme skiing, something or other. Whatever that is, it's not popular enough generally for most ski slopes to stay open. They need the price to be above their average variable cost to open back up in the long run. And if we're talking about opening up in the long run, it's going to have to be this price or higher. And oftentimes it's going to be higher in the short run and in the long run. They'll just pay their bills with whatever they made here. But they're not going to operate if people aren't going to pay a high enough price to keep coming in. They'll just shut down, wait for the price to recover when there's some snow on the slopes, and it makes a little bit more sense to pay a higher price to go out and ski down them. Another example, I worked as a lifeguard for many years. We had an indoor pool where the price wouldn't fluctuate much at any point during the 12-month calendar year. But we also had an outdoor pool. That could fetch a perfectly decent price during the summer, but of course in the wintertime, people might pay a tiny price down here to go ice swimming or something, but it's not worth it for the variable costs you'd have to pay to let them in. So naturally, outdoor pools are down here in the winter and then up here somewhere in the summer. Indoor pools are more around here all year round. So this is the short run supply curve. And it is basically the marginal cost curve. When you see the marginal cost curve in the short run at the point at which it makes sense to operate, and from then on, they're going to be one and the same. The supply curve is going to represent the typical firm's marginal cost curve. So an interesting feature as much as anything else. So that's repeating what I already said. So let's move on to something else I've alluded to, and that is the phenomenon of entry and exit from the market, and why it is that we're not going to see positive economic profits or losses in the long run. In the short run, prices will fluctuate wherever they're going to go, and the demand and supply situations will change as tastes and preferences change, as people move in and out, new people decide to try to start a business, etc. But in the long run, we're going to expect zero economic profit, and now we're going to see exactly why that is. So we're starting with a market situation, the supply and demand schedules equalize at this price and at this quantity, and that price informs the typical firm that, hey, you're making money. So not only should you produce this quantity, but you should produce it as long as the price is here. You're making money, you're making profits, things are great. So what happens if we see firms making these positive economic profits here? Remember, one of the features of a perfectly competitive market is it's easy to get in. Relatively speaking, if there are a lot of profits being earned in an industry, a lot of people are going to say, well, I'm going to take out a loan. I'm going to open up the same business. I can do the same thing. I know how they produce. And I'm going to charge just a little bit less. And the entire market will come to me. And I will sell all of my output. Or I may even... I'll try to match the price a little bit, but just to get a little more of the market coming to me, I might undersell just a little bit. And everybody comes to me, and I sell to everybody, and everything's great. So there's an incentive to undercut the competition in order to sell more output. So as that happens, more and more firms enter. The supply curve shifts to the right, and look what happens to the price. The price starts to fall. Supply curve shifts right, price falls, new price is right here at the break-even point. Economic profits have been eliminated, and there's no longer any incentive for new firms to enter into this industry. The profits are gone. If you have an industry where, again, remember economic profit, I can earn a certain wage by getting a certain job, or I can earn the same amount of money by opening a business. There's no reason really to enter in, especially since I'm just going to be shifting that supply curve even further to the right and dropping the price, so you don't have any more entering activity into this market by other potential firms. So this is why in the long run we may have profit for a while, but firms will enter, and those profits go away in the long run. We have the zero profit equilibrium. Meanwhile, this is just reminding us why zero profit is normal profit. What I just said, in the long run, that's where we're going to end up. But what if prices are low and we're losing money? And this is why this is titled overexpansion, meaning more people come in thinking they could have gotten the profits they saw before, but they push prices down here, and people are losing money. So what happens when firms are losing money? Remember, I said in the short run, you're going to keep operating here. You have your fixed costs to pay, and it doesn't cost you as much for any of these units of production as you're able to bring in at this price. So you'll make more money by staying open. You're still going to lose money because you have to pay your fixed costs, but in the short run, you're going to stay open. But in the long run, this price doesn't recover. Once your fixed costs are all taken care of and you can shut down in the long run, you're getting out if this price isn't going back up and you don't think it will. So what happens then? Now this is also going to show that you have demand decrease. This is getting into different things. I don't know why I kept that slide. What I wanted was this slide right here where losses will incentivize people to exit. People leave when the price is low. In the short run, you don't shut down, but in the long run, people leave. And that'll shift that supply curve back to the left, and prices will rise again to this point. So the price is down here, firms will exit, and prices will rise. If the price is up here, firms will enter in, and prices will fall. And so the long run equilibrium is here. There's no incentive to change from this system. There's no incentive to leave because you're making money, you're running your business, you may as well stay open, but there's also no incentive for anyone else to enter in because nobody's making positive economic profit. So if the price was once higher, it's going to fall. If it was once lower, it's going to rise to the point where zero profit is indeed normal profit. And that is the long run scenario. So a couple more things to say about perfect competition before wrapping up this market structure, moving on to the next one. Another reason why economists, remember I keep going on about how much economists love perfect competition even though it doesn't exist. The reason we love perfect competition so much is it is the ceteris paribus anyway, it is the socially most optimal market structure you can have. Might not be great for the firms, but the firms are still making money. The reason for this is you don't have too much production and you don't have too little production. You have just the right amount. Now, you have parts of the demand curve here where people here aren't getting the good and service they want because it's too expensive. And we might not like that, but you have to remember there's a supply side to the market. It would be great if we had an infinite number of widgets for everybody who wants a widget. But there are costs involved. The more we make as a society, if this is our representative firm, the more we make, the more expensive it gets to make it. Somebody has to pay that cost because businesses can't operate on a loss forever. The somebody who has to pay that cost, and again, we're not talking about markets where we want more production and we want fewer people left out. We're just saying in general, the consumer has to pay that cost by paying a price that's going to be equal to the marginal cost, equal to or greater than the marginal cost. So if people are willing to pay, their demand is high enough to where they're willing to pay for that output, then the supply side is going to provide the output because the price is high enough to make that level of output a mutually beneficial level of output for them. So we're not getting too little. People who are willing to pay the price for output are going to pay for it. We also don't get too much production though, because as the costs become prohibitively high, if nobody's willing to pay for it, we're not going to produce it. And these resources can then go to some other industry. We're not overproducing, we're not underproducing. We are producing the exact amount that we need to be in a perfectly competitive market. Not all markets are perfectly competitive, but perfectly competitive markets are that sweet spot, that economic Goldilocks zone where you don't get too much, you don't get too little, because every unit that is produced, the costs of producing that unit are paid for by the people who want that production to happen. The costs are paid for. People want it badly enough to pay for it. But we don't have production that people don't want. At least not people down here on this demand curve want production, but they don't want it badly. I want a Lamborghini, but I don't want one badly enough to pay the prohibitively high price. So we don't have too many Lamborghinis out there. Only the people who are willing to pay for them get them, essentially. I'm not declaring that the Lamborghini market is perfectly competitive, but that's just an extreme example of how, yeah, you want something, but are you willing to pay for it? If you're not, then we don't have underproduction. We only have underproduction if we have deadweight loss, meaning that people are willing to pay for production that isn't happening. In perfect competition, when we have the equilibrium price, we have that perfect level of production. Not too much, not too little. And that's why perfect competition is so great. Certainly much better, at least from this standpoint, than the other market structures we're going to be talking about in the next videos.